this turbulent level of cultural division based solely upon the varying shades of people's skin. And so this, in turn, is intended to provoke widespread governmental dependency on put-upon groups and thus a one-party political control. One-party political control. That's the end game here. That's the goal. So we need to understand, though, that even at its core, dividing people based upon their color of their skin and trying to create those divisions, that is inherently racist. But again, it's not just the color of your skin. The other people groups they love to target, Christians. And I was reading a report that a number of students attended this, and some Christian students went to this white privilege seminar. And the College Fix reports that the Christian students in attendance report that it largely constituted a reproach on white privilege. So they want to tie this Christian privilege and white privilege, these notions together, kind of as interchangeable. As I mentioned, they hate white Christians, particularly Bible-believing evangelicals who believe that God who he says he is, and that his truths are infallible, and that the Bible is the God-breathed truth. And so the students that were there at George Washington University at this Christian privilege offensive, anti-Christian, bigoted seminar, the facilitator, who's a white Christian gay male, LGBT, of course, no surprise there, activist. They said that he, of course, just deflected students' questions and with a bunch of leftist progressive platitudes, talking points. And so the discussion, it says, while it's centered around whether or not Christian privilege exists and in what context it exists, they said that much of the workshop was also spent on white privilege. One student, Emma Schindel, attended this so-called Christian privilege diversity training, they call it. Oh, so much for diversity. We're going to point to the Christians. Ooh, the Christians, the evil Christians, the privileged Christians. Let's build them up so now we can knock them down. That's exactly what they did here. It says College Fix reports the Christian privilege diversity training session aimed to show how Christians have, quote, built-in advantages in the world today in relation to their non-Christian counterparts, according to the description of a screenshot by the College Fix. I want to come back with some of the quotes, some of the observations that this young woman, a student, a sophomore there at George Washington University, Schindel, she had some great comments and observations, not just about this anti-Christian seminar, but about kind of a culture of anti-Christian bigotry and hatred on the campus of George Washington University. It's a little surprised that they would have that kind of culture when you have professors, the faculty, staff, administration effectively engaging in this white privilege nonsense in order to point fingers at a group of people based on their skin color. What a bunch of racists. This is Matt Barber in for Brian Fisher. We'll be back. Don't go away.
This is Dr. Richard Lamb, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. Primary elections will soon begin in states around the country, and many already know how they're going to cast their votes. New research from George Barna shows that those in the middle, the tiebreakers, many of whom will not show up, will be the deciding factor. It has been apparent for some time that basically about a third of the nation is conservative, about a third of the nation is liberal, and about a third of the people who decide our elections, the mushy middle, or what Barna calls the disengaged, are indeed disengaged. It is clear they are more often the least interested, the least involved, and the least informed. So when they vote, they often vote for shallow and half-hearted reasons. This has been a continuing source of frustration to the engaged, both left and right. The internet culture feeds this. Research shows us that the people in the middle disproportionately tend to operate in virtual electronic culture instead of engaging in the real culture. Unfortunately, instead of using the internet to inform themselves of the issues, they use it as an entertainment narcotic, what Neil Postman calls amusing ourselves to death. And the problem is getting worse, not better. God made us for fellowship with Him and with each other. Our virtual relationships are not real relationships. They are like junk food for the soul, providing temporary fulfillment but no nutritional value. We as Christians have been called upon to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world, and that means providing the gospel, which is health food for the soul, and will inevitably, if internalized, cause people to engage emotionally and spiritually with their neighbors and their fellow human beings. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio. Listen to the audio podcast or download today's program at afr.net. You can also read Brian Fisher's columns at afa.net. afa.net.
And we're back. This is Matt Barber. And again today for Brian Fisher. Brian will be back behind the Focal Point microphone on Monday. It is my pleasure and honor and privilege to be with you today. We are talking about these notions of privilege. The left has found a new tactic. They attach the word privilege to whatever group of people they don't like, that they want to demean and discriminate against and ridicule and badger into submission and marginalize and so forth. They attach the word privilege, for instance, white privilege, and do that in order so they can elevate that people group up to a certain height, so they can then be justified, at least in their minds, and coming and knocking them down. It's racist. It's inherently racist. It paints an entire people group with a broad brush. It stereotypes people. And this idea of white privilege. My mother, grew up in Oklahoma. And these leftists, they say just by virtue of the fact that you have white skin, you are the beneficiary of white privilege, right? You have a leg up. Well, my mom grew up in poverty out in the watermelon fields of Oklahoma. Her stepfather was a watermelon farmer. Then they were divorced. Then she grew up outside of Ryan, Oklahoma, a little tiny town in a tiny just house that was falling apart at the seams, a tiny little farmhouse. She oftentimes literally did not have shoes. Did not have shoes to wear to school. They had an outhouse, and they bathed in a water trough outside of her little house. That was the life that my mother grew up in. She picked herself up by the bootstraps. She worked hard. She was able to get into college, went to college, worked hard to pay her way through college, married my father. They are successful individuals, not by virtue of the fact that they are white, but by virtue of the fact that they worked hard. Well, it is inherently racist and offensive to say that my mom should be knocked down a few notches because she is the beneficiary of white privilege. That's offensive. It's racist. It stereotypes whites. My mom does not fit into that stereotype, just like the stereotypes, with the abhorrent stereotypes we've seen in the past of blacks. You know, that they're all blacks are criminals according to the old racist stereotypes, right? So do we talk about black criminality and paint all African Americans with a broad brush and say they're all a bunch of criminals because of these disproportionate crimes committed by that certain category of people group based on the color of their skin? No, that's nonsense. That's hateful. It's racist. So let's not look to these people groups. That's what the left wants to do. Communism, right? It's all about the collective. Give from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Karl Marx, this is Marxism through and through, to create these broad swaths of people so that we can go after both individuals and people groups. That's what they're trying to do here. Well, maybe the only people that the left hate worse than the white race, than the white people based on the white color of their skin, are Christians. And we're talking about this campus reform reported on this George Washington University Christian Privilege Seminar. that was held there, a bigoted seminar, anti-Christian seminar, to denigrate, to again elevate as privileged Christian people. People like Jack Phillips, who are losing their, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because he takes a stand on biblical marriage. The florist, the baker, the privileged Christians in Egypt, the Coptic Christians that are being beheaded by Islamists. I guess that's what they mean by Christian privilege, right? Well, we are Christians, and we are privileged in that we are privileged to know the Son of God. We are privileged to have the Savior of the world, to know the way, the truth, and the life, and the path to eternal life. So in that sense, I guess we are privileged, but Christians are going to face persecution on earth. Christ told us so. They're going to hate us because they first hated him. And so, Paul said, count it all joy. So I guess we are privileged in the sense that every time they attack us as Christians based on our Christianity, like they're doing at George Washington University here, they're attacking Christ himself. They hate him, so they're going to hate us. They're going to attack us. Well, one of the students there, a sophomore, a Christian at George Washington University, Emma Schindel, she told the College Fix, who was also there on site at this seminar, she said that she has observed that, quote, respect for Christians on campus has deteriorated, specifically because of the finger-pointing done by groups like the MSSC. I guess that's this anti-Christian bigoted group that put on this seminar with this LGBT studies professor. She said that students are, quote, made fun of for attending religious services, and they are looked at as, quote, less than. Well, of course they are. When you start saying that Christians have Christian privilege, that's the green light, students. That's the green light. All other non-Christian students to go after, to bash Christians. We elevate them up as being so-called privileged so that we can knock them down. That's the goal. That's the design of the whole notion of privilege, be it white privilege, Christian privilege. And we see white privilege again on display in South Africa right now. Well, because they have white privilege, now the government is going to steal all of the farmland without compensation or due process, and white farmers, because of white privilege in South Africa, are now being murdered and raped by the hundreds, are having to flee as refugees to Australia. It's insane. Schindel goes on to say religious preference has been used to make remarks about the intelligence of specific students on campus. She said that, quote, many students view religion, but more specifically Christianity, as a, quote, fun myth that's worthy of study